Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Transport, Challenges and Opportunities in These Disruptive and Uncertain Times. My name is Kate Kenny and I'm Vice President and Head of Sales for the UK and Ireland at Jacobs. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce today's webinar, which is brought to you by Jacobs and Atos UK. Atos develops and implements innovative digital solutions that support business transformation of its clients and addresses the environmental and social challenges faced by all. And Jacobs' global team of multidisciplinary specialists tackles some of the world's toughest challenges by providing technical professional services across a range of disciplines, everything from traditional civil engineering to urban design, transport planning and environmental science. Chris Lewis, the Vice President for Retail, Transport and Logistics at Atos, will be closing today's session, and I'll shortly be handing over to Jenny Martin, who is Secretary General at ITS UK, who will be moderating the panel discussion and introducing the panellists. As we all know very well, 2020 has been a different year from the one that many of us would have expected. The escalation of the COVID-19 pandemic and introduction of lockdowns by governments around the world caused a seismic shift in transport use. Never before in living memory have transport authorities and operators actively dissuaded people from using their services. But this is a reality we have faced in 2020. And while the pandemic may have taken much of our attention this year, on the 31st of December 2019, the UK officially left the European Union. And we're now less than 2 months away from the end of the transition period. Transport is undoubtedly a national critical infrastructure which has been impacted by the likes of COVID-19 and Brexit. Each organisation in the industry has faced its own challenges during these disruptions and will undoubtedly be managing them in their own unique ways. We're fortunate enough to be joined today by some key figures from the transport industry on our panel, sharing their own stories and discussing topics such as how transport organisations can remain nimble, how they can manage the current disruption, and what they have learned that will shape their future strategies. So shortly, Jenny will introduce those panellists, and each will have a couple of minutes to set the scene from their organisation's perspectives, and then we'll move on to the panel discussion itself. During the session, you have the option of using the live chat facility, which hopefully you can see to your right, to network and share thoughts and to post questions anonymously via the questions tab. And Jenny will pose these questions to the panellists towards the end of the session. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Jenny Martin, Secretary General at ITS UK, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Jenny.
Thank you very much, Kate. It's my great pleasure to be here today, and I'm very grateful to Jacobs and Atos for the invitation to chair this discussion. Both Jacobs and Atos are executive members of our organisation, ITS United Kingdom, so this is a chance for me to thank you again for your support as well. We have an excellent panel, as Kate said. We have James Dean, who is West Coast Mainline Route Director at Network Rail. We have Paul Campion, who is CEO of TRL, and TRL also hold the chairmanship of ITS UK at the moment, so a double pleasure to see Paul here. We have Simon Reed, who is Head of Technology and Data at Transport for London. Simon and I have a very long bond going back many years based on our mutual love of the bus. So hopefully public transport will feature in our discussion today. And last but not least, we also have Jackie Allen, who is Sponsorship and Development Director at Highways England. So I think you agree with me that we're set to have some great insights from that panel. Kate talked about the many challenges we face, and all of those things are true. And there's probably other ones that she didn't have quite have time to get around to. There's so many. But I also personally think that we live at a time when it's possible for us to have a bit of a reset, both as individuals and as a society, we have been given an opportunity to think again about how we organise our lives and our activities. And transport, of course, is an absolutely key part of nearly all human endeavour requires transport in one form or another. So for us working in the sector, yes, we have problems and we have challenges. We even have some tragedies, but we also, in my opinion, have opportunities. And we're about to find out whether the panel agrees with me on that. I'm going to invite them one by one to make a little bit of an opening address to us, set out their stall, take 2 minutes to give their view on the current situation and talk about their business challenges. And if they want to say anything about their personal challenges, that they are very welcome as well. So those two are intertwined in transport. So I'll start by handing the floor to James Dean, who, as I said, is from Network Rail, and let him start us off with his 2 minutes of scene setting. The floor is yours, James.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for the invite this morning to come and join you in the discussion, and hopefully some really valuable sharing of some ideas. So I'm the route director of West Coast South, running the route between Euston and Crewe. One of the most economically important routes within the network, vitally important not just for passengers, but increasingly these days important for our freight as well. So I'm sure we'll get into those sorts of areas shortly. But any of you that's used Euston Station, which is my main station, will know it's not just the time that's difficult at the moment, it's the environment that we work in sometime that is also difficult. We're operating an aged asset at the same time as while it's being constructed as well. So some difficult context there as well. But what are we doing about the challenges we face today? Well, we are investing more money. We're putting £100 million into more resilience and performance of our network. We're also working at the operations of our railway and how do we fit into the terminology that we want to bring back better the railway to those that want to travel going forward. And that's a real challenge for us, and we'll, I'm sure, share some thoughts about how we can do that. And that's not only on performance, but it's also on the service offering that we can give to our passengers and our customers when they do come back. And how will we do that? Well, we've got to be innovative. I think we've got to think about how we're going to attract people back to the railway. Information, I think, is a key part of that, allowing people to know when they can travel, when the loads and passenger numbers are low, when things are on time, or when they have options to travel in the way that they want to travel. So it's not just the product, it's how we sell the product increasingly these days. But let's put some context around that. Why is that? Well, in reality, we're at about 38% of our customer numbers of before the COVID pandemic. And that ranges for some long distance operators well below that in 30% mark, but also some of our more metro urban railways running at about 60%. So different challenges and different opportunities that gives us. And we know that when we do address that challenge, we need to address our customers' requirements. They want a safe, they want a clean, and they want a reliable railway. But that's going to be a challenge with the financial challenges that the industry is going to face. So we need to think differently about how we do things more efficiently, effectively as a holistic industry. So I'm sure that will come up as well in our conversations. So yes, we've got to be adaptive, innovative, and we've got to think about how we build the railway back to offer the service for our customers going forward. And I look forward to engaging with you in some questions and some debate.
Thank you, James, for starting us off so well. I haven't made a long distance train journey since March, like probably most of us, and I miss it enormously. Yeah. And yes, we need to make sure that it's still there when we're allowed to get back to doing it. So thank you. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Paul Campion from TRL. Probably some overlaps and some different challenges faced there. So Paul, the floor is yours for your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Kate, Chris, to everyone for the invitation, and thank you all for spending the time with us. It's a great privilege to be with everyone here. So TRL, I'm sure many of you know, it's a research and consultancy organisation. As COVID happened, we perhaps, well, it was a bit of a secret, don't tell anyone, we surprised ourselves by how effectively we transition to working from home. Not everything we do is office-based, of course. We have just finished constructing the Smart Mobility Living Lab on the streets of London, and that was quite seriously disruptive because teams couldn't go out to do work on the roads for a period. Projects like the platooning project we're doing for Highways England and the DFT to explore new technologies on the roads, again, were postponed, slowed down because the conditions on the roads changed quite dramatically. But for the most part, we transitioned really smoothly. And I think that's a learning point that we can all take from this. Because as individuals, as organisations, as a country, we found that it was possible to dramatically change our behaviour, probably far more than we would have imagined would be possible in such a short time. Why is that important? Well, it's already been mentioned, the pandemic, unfortunately, is not the only challenge that we're going to be facing over the next few months and years. Brexit, of course, is going to unwind over the next few months, but I think much more fundamental and much bigger is the climate crisis. It's going to make COVID-19 look like a walk in the park. And we are going to need, above all, to change our behaviour. That's obvious. And I'm fundamentally an optimist. I believe that we can find ways around this and that we will. But we've had some, perhaps some perverse incentives applying, some unintended consequences that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. At a time when clearly we need to be doubling down on the time we spend thinking about how the future will be and how we need to change, and researching and developing the technologies, the techniques, and the processes that we'll need, is exactly the time when everyone, for understandable reasons, has got distracted. Budgets have not been cut, but they haven't been spent. The government's talked about increasing the amount of R&D spending in the economy. That is really important for the transport and logistics sectors, which traditionally have not been big spenders on R&D as a proportion of revenue. And the budgets that we've got have not been spent because people have been distracted by the emergencies on our plate. That's totally understandable, but we have to get focus back on the medium and the longer term. Otherwise, we're stoking up more problems for the future. As I said, I'm an optimist. We will get through this together, and we have a lot of exciting stuff going on, and any number of great ideas that we think can make a difference here. But we have to work together. This is not something that TRL can do on their own, God help us. It's not something the transport sector can do on their own. It's not something the transport and logistics sectors can do on their own. Our impact touches every part of everyone's economic, social activity. We need to be thinking fundamentally about how things are going to be different and getting on with it. RIS2, CP6, these are sort of locked in stone. We've got a very few years now to work out the answers to start implementing in time. So let's get on with them. That's all I have to say, Jenny. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. I attended the virtual launch of the Smart Mobility Living Lab just a few days ago, I think that was. Great, and not least because it's another... it's somebody else joining in to give Stratford in East London, which is not far from me, to give that area another lift, which it seriously needs. And it's brilliant for me to watch how Stratford's going from something that was, frankly, in not a very good shape before we were given the Olympics, to now with high-tech companies like yourselves moving in there and really transforming the lives of the people who live there. So very nice initiative. If you're not familiar with the SMLL, as I believe it's called, then look it up. It's well worth taking a look. Okay, so talking of challenges, next I'm going to invite Simon Reed from TfL to speak. I was very dismayed to see in the news this morning that there are strong rumours that we're about to be banned from non-essential public transport use in London again. So we're living in challenging times, but I'm only a victim of it. Simon's at the sharp end. So Simon, how are things with you?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. So welcome everybody, and I hope you find this is useful. I'm not going to dwell too much on the operational stuff. I mean, I think all of the transport networks went through a massive upheaval to shift their operations. Certainly in March, when there was literally a closed down situation and people were taking services out and rebalancing the schedules to meet demand. And then, of course, we spent most of the summer putting schedules back into operation to provide the services for everybody who wanted to travel, such that they could travel. So, operationally, we're running probably nigh on 100% of the services that we were this time last year, but with sort of 35% of the tube passengers going and around 60% of the bus passengers that we had before. And that's a combination of people like us all now working at home, and changes in and obviously the impact of social distancing and things like that coming through. So operationally, I think we were, I think slap on the back to most of the operators and authorities who've actually managed to respond to the operational needs quite well. But I'm a little bit like Paul. I'm quite an optimist. So what's the big things that have taken us and taking us forward? I think is the rise of data as the new oil or the new blood of the whole organization. Data-based decision making has become well, it's now the mantra for every single thing we do before going forward. If it wasn't the case before, it certainly is now. That on a day-on-day basis, people are expecting to have the entire operational data set from the day before, the week before, the month before, to be able to forecast trends and to be able to respond immediately to that. I don't know if you remember when we were providing services for key workers during the height of lockdown, there was a bit of a furore where we had some overcrowding in certain areas, but being able to pinpoint that, be able to pinpoint that by the hour, be able to provide additional services, whether that's queuing situations or additional rolling stock, absolutely essential to the way forward. So if you have members of the family or members of your operation who are data nerds, this is the rise of the data nerd. And by coming out of this, the new kings of our transport operation, well, I think there'll be those people who can provide and use data for our forward networks.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. And yeah, I agree. I think we're about to enter the age of the. I think it's kind of to call them data and IT experts and not use the N word. It's a bit rude, but yeah, their time is upon us, definitely. So our fourth member of the panel is Jackie Allen from Highways England. So, Jackie, those three inputs have all been extremely valuable, and now we look forward to hearing from Highways England. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be involved in this webinar. I'm Sponsorship Director for Major Projects within Highways England, and I sponsorship accountability for major projects within the north of England. When COVID struck us, we were at the end of our first 5 years period where we've been funded. We were rushing into that, and there was we were very busy and pushing people to complete their startup works, etc., so that we could finish the RIS to the satisfaction of our ORR. And then we were looking forward to the lull, but it didn't come because COVID came. And if we had to say, could we plan to move our organisation to 90% of our staff working from home in a period of a couple of days, we would have said, no, we've got to do a full change programme first, we've got to understand it, and then we'd go with it. But that's exactly what COVID allowed us to do. We had to move straight into that position, as many of us have said. But how did we do that and have to commit to still maintaining the roads, so we couldn't stop everything, still continue to deliver our major projects and make it the way the service user wants it to be seen. So they're not really concerned that we have an issue. They want to just use the roads and make sure they're maintained and used. And that's what we had to do. So we did do that. It was challenging, and I have to say in some ways illuminating in terms of the things we actually managed to work through. And it continues to be challenging. It is exhausting in this space. And we were talking about that earlier today as the leadership team, and saying that actually, we are running a race, and now we thought we were coming out of that race. And actually it's fatiguing because we're at the end of the race and you have to muster up more energy to go now, potentially another 6 months. So as an organisation, we've been looking at actually how do we do that? What are the things we can do with our supply chain, because we work heavily with our supply chain, and how do we do things differently? I think one of the presenters talked about being more agile, and we've definitely had to move into a space where we have to be more agile. We are fraught with lots of processes within Highways England, and how do we get around those, not around them, but how do we use this opportunity that we found ourselves in to drive some of the change? And that's what we've been looking at. The road usage on the SRN went down to about 37%. It's risen back to 89 now. But the makeup of those road users have changed. So we've got way more cars. And is that going to be what happens going forward? Have people decided they are less trusting at the moment of public transport and using the SRN? What does that mean for us going forward? Or will they just revert back to normal modes of transport? So there's lots of things for us to consider and think about as we move forward. So yes, thank you very much.
That's great, Jackie, and yes, I would completely concur. As a long-term outside observer of Highways England, considering your size and your remit and your structure, what you've achieved over this very challenging period is nothing short of remarkable. And I think you reminded all of us that lots of organisations in the transport sector, large and small, public sector, private sector, and no strange territory in between, an awful lot of us have achieved an awful lot. And from CEOs to roadside operatives, we probably should praise and be proud a bit more than we are. And hopefully this panel discussion today, produced by Jacobs and Atos, is doing its part to foster that climate of gratitude and positivity, I would say. So thank you very much for your scene-setting remarks. I'd like to remind the audience, whom I cannot see you, but I know you're right there. Please put your questions and your comments in the chat. Don't be scared to ask something that you think might be unwelcome or controversial. We, the panel, are very resilient people, so we can cope with it even if it's critical. So please ask ahead, and we'll get on to sorting out your questions according to my schedule, 11:45. Now, panel, I feel that you've done such a good job of answering what, according to our briefing here, was question one, which is what lessons have you learned from the current disruptions in your organisation and the industry as a whole? So I'm actually going to park that question, come back to it if we have time to say some more, but I feel you've covered it quite well. And if it's okay with you, I will move straight on to what we, the panel, know as question two, which is, where do you see the biggest opportunities? So that's a nice one for those amongst us who have declared that we are optimists. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for the short-term and long-term benefit and improvement to come out of these challenging times? So, panel, I hope you agree. We're going straight to question two. And in that case, I would like to return to James Dean and ask him to talk to us about the opportunities for Network Rail and for the sector as a whole. Unmute. Not issues. Okay, well, while we sort that out, can I move on then, because we have a very limited amount of time. Paul Campion, can you try addressing the question, and while you do that, hopefully James can get talking.
I'll do my best, Jenny.
Please, thank you.
The biggest opportunity, you said short-term and long-term. I'm not necessarily going to treat those as two separate things. I think we've already seen, have we not, that within towns and cities there is a massive latent demand for active travel. I know outside my house during lockdown, every day suddenly there were families walking, there were people cycling, and it was obvious that there was latent demand. I think the way that transport has been planned, built and provided in the UK over the past few decades has been very much on the basis of predict and provide. It's been very much about supply management, and the whole topic of demand management has been a bit taboo. But that doesn't, I think, really reflect the extent to which demand is created by supply, every bit as much as supply is delivered to meet demand. The way we live our lives is encoded, it's built into our environment, isn't it? The way that where we choose to live versus where we choose to work, or where our children go to school, or where we do our shopping, or where we do our socialising, determines our travel requirements and the existence or non-existence of public transport, the provision of parking or non-provision of parking. All of these aspects, to quite a large extent, determine our travel choices. And I think the real world experiment we've just done has revealed that in a way that maybe as professionals in the transport area we all intellectually knew, but as citizens perhaps we didn't feel in the same way. And so we've got a short-term opportunity, I think, to renegotiate these, to have a societal discussion about really what sort of lives do we want to live, how do we want to live them. I'm very mindful of Anne Hidalgo's position as the mayor of Paris, the idea of the 15-minute city, reconfiguring things that I don't have to travel. And clearly I can choose to. But I think if we start with a vision of full, satisfying, high-quality lives, which enable people to get involved in economic as well as social activities, but have a low-carbon footprint, that's a much more constructive and, by the way, effective way to have the discussion than talking in terms, as sometimes we do, of asking people to give up their cars. I don't want to give up my car. I'd love to not have to use it as much, but I don't want to give it up. And I think recognising those psychological realities is really important. In the longer term, well, our opportunities, I think, come from technology. We've talked about the forcing functions, the things that we have to deal with, but we've also touched on some of the possibilities that we have that we haven't had in the past. Data, digitalisation, these enable us to do things in ways we never have done before. We need to experiment, we need to try some stuff out, we need to use our creativity and imagination as a sector, but also as citizens. And we've got to start, I think, releasing some of the mental constraints that perhaps many of us have had in the past, that really there were only a quite limited set of options. I've got one tiny little story to illustrate that. Again, as it happens in France, that Citroen have introduced a thing called the Citroen Ami. I don't know whether you've seen it. It's a little thing, looks like, you know, a smart car. It looks like one of those, but small. And it's fully electric, does about 30 miles an hour, I think. Basically fiberglass, relatively short range, can be driven by a 14-year-old under French law because it doesn't quite class as a car. And I think looking at these creative new options, moving from a general device sitting outside on my drive, you know, a big internal combustion engine car that I use for everything, to specialised devices. This is a bike journey. I'm going to walk for that journey. This is an e-scooter journey. It's raining, so I'll get my Citroen Ami out. And I think thinking more creative ways to fulfil those needs is another great opportunity we have. I've talked enough, Jenny. Time for someone else to have a go.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was indeed optimistic, as you promised. I grew up in a 15-minute city. That's a long time ago now, but maybe technology can get us back to that. I think there are lots of benefits to be had. Okay, so next I'll move on to Simon. Opportunities in the long term and the short term. Simon, please share your wisdom.
Yeah, I think the ability to move at pace to change the configuration of the offering, really to respond and build on that point that Paul said. So the ability to be able to change and reconfigure quickly, that's what we think as a city transport authority, what we need to do and what we need to do better and do more of. What I mean by that is, as a transport authority, you know, our strapline is keep London moving. We're here to make sure that the city keeps going. And if that means that people move away from some public transport modes and move back towards cycling or walking, great, fantastic. We have to make sure that that happens if that is what we need to do to keep the city up and running. And in the short term, what we discovered, I was mentioning, so at network level, you could look at the reductions in volumes. But what we've seen is, I hadn't heard that definition of the 15-minute city, but what we have seen is that some of the outer London areas are actually getting an increase in people using the local areas of transport, because like us, they're all working at home, but they still have to go shopping and get things and do bits and bobs. They're doing that much more locally. So what we've been having to do is to reconfigure our networks. So if they're using public transport, what services do we need? And that's probably going to have to increase greatly. To give you an answer, to give you an idea, in short term, we did normally between sort of March and end of June, July, we would do sort of 40 to 50 service changes to the bus network. We did 10 times that number during the lockdown bit and the coming out of it. So we've learned how to, we always had it as a capability within the organization to change the bus service, but having your figures that are labeling you to see exactly where people are moving from and to, having, in our case, quite flexible contracts to enable us to alter the services, and then having the infrastructure to be able to actually roll that through at speed and get those changes implemented. Not a perfect world. We'd like to do more. Obviously, transport managers, directors, and certainly politicians would like all of this to go much, much, much faster than it already is. But that's really the aim, is that if coming out of this, if we've learned how to reconfigure our network to meet demand, however that is provided, it's got to be a positive thing. So the move towards sustainability has been in the Mayor's transport strategy, and I think we've probably just accelerated it. I mean, I think London was going that way anyway. Paul said in one of his earlier comments about the climate change agenda. Once we're past this, I think that will start becoming the primary driver to most metropolitan areas' transport policies, and it'll be that dictates. Although we haven't really got it as an agenda point, but zero emission vehicles, all of those types of things. You can see that as the underlying thread to improve air quality and to make a better environment for our city dwellers. And if the 15-minute city and neighborhood working is the one of the characteristics of that sort of policy, then great. As a transport authority, we would be able to respond to that and to provide the network that the city leads. Jen, back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Simon. And I am, of course, looking out of my window here at the Becontree estate, which is a perfect 15-minute environment. The only reason any of us had to leave here would be for work. But we even have 2 full-service large hospitals within very easy reach. So back in the 1920s, we knew how to do it. And actually, we should be better at it now, shouldn't we? So that's a little bit of food for them. Though, again, for those of you outside London, yes, I do understand that it's the density we have here which makes that sort of thing easier. So I'm not being London-centric. So talking of not being London-centric at all, Jackie from Highways England, your optimistic thoughts. You were already onto an optimistic line, particularly about the way you talked about how you had reacted as an organisation. But more optimism, please. The floor is yours.
Yes, I think for Highways England, what we're looking at is digital roads. What do our roads look like in the future? And that'll play a large part in what we do. We're thinking connected vehicles. When will they come on? 10 to 15 years time, which also ties into the environmental agenda, as Simon referred to, and we have to play our part in that. So we understand that driving down in terms of the carbon agenda space, how we do that in our construction and in our maintenance of the network is something we're really grappling with at the moment. Digital roads is definitely a space that we started thinking about, and it will take some time to tie in. Obviously, we do some research parts of interventions with other organisations to look at how we can do that. But that's going to play a big part in what happens and what the SRN looks like going forward. And then also in terms of wider environment and tying into local networks, and how do we do that better? As I said in my intro, that our users don't care or know when the SRN ends and the local road starts, and how do we make that interaction with the local authorities and local networks? How do we improve that for the user? So again, that's one of the things we're looking at and want to do. I think what the opportunity that's brought about by COVID is we've with ourselves and our supply chain have been more agile, as I stated as well, and also we've done things more innovatively than potentially would have done. It's forced us into a space to consider innovation. And I think that's what we need to not lose. We need to make sure we continue to push the innovation side of things. You know, how do we automate in order to achieve some of these things I've spoken about, particularly the carbon agenda? How do we do a bit more automation? How do we develop things off-site to be able to bring them off-site so we're not causing those issues there? So I think that's one of the things we're looking at. And also in terms of sustainable travel, how can we play our part in that as well? We are looking more at cycle paths and that sort of thing. So whilst most of our SRN can't accommodate that, we're looking at just coming off our network and actually can we support in that space the local network to some degree. So I think there's a definitely more of a coming together with other organisations that we need to do over the coming years and months to be able to capitalise on the things that we've started thinking about and to move them forward as quickly as we can. As one of the speakers said, sometimes it doesn't happen as quickly as you want to, but we've definitely started on that route, and that's what our agenda is going forward.
Thank you, Jackie. You sound excited. Are you excited?
Yeah, I'm usually excited by change, and not so much COVID, but the change that's brought. But usually with change brings opportunity, and we have to look for the positions of opportunity that we can take. You know, working across organisations will bring that as well, and we'll check and challenge each other, and probably allow us to get to a space more readily than if we worked independently. So definitely that's something we need to look at. And yes, I'm excited about how that happens, and in 10 to 15 years, what our SRN will look like.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, talking of exciting, everybody please cross everything, and we will ask James Dean to give his comments.
Yeah, apologies for that before. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Brilliant, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, well, the benefit of going last now is I've heard everybody else comment, so I can add to the commentary rather than going first. But yeah, I think some of the comments that have been made are really relevant. This is not just a challenging time. I think in terms of a description, it's a point of change, and I think that's come through really strongly. And I think that's where we would like to be as well, which is as a network, as a countrywide network, is how can we be the backbone? How can we be part of that change program rather than just trying to build back to where we were before? And I think that's a real opportunity for us to reflect as an industry. How can we play our part in that change program? But it's also a challenge as well as an opportunity, because as an industry, if we wanted to change some of our timetables, let's say, for instance, much like not like the bus network where we can do it many times, it could take us 18 months to change our timetables. And that really is not where we need to be if we're going to change with the patterns that we're seeing in terms of what people are doing very quickly in the country, and where we need to move to adapt to those changing dynamics. So that's a real challenge for us, but an opportunity. But what have we been doing in that space? So particularly on West Coast, we've been trying to almost treat this situation as a Control-Alt-Delete moment, where we've gone back to a real baseline of timetable. As many people will know, we've gone to a very simplistic timetable. And what that's allowed us to do, and many of you from a data perspective will probably understand this, we've almost been able to set a baseline. We've almost been able to reaffirm some of our operating principles. We've been able to test some of our physical models in terms of how do we plan our operations, and then test them as we go through. And what we've been doing is building those back up in a way that we can control the impact on our industry. And at the same time, we've invested in a digital twin model that's going to allow us to inform that digital twin, so that it becomes part of a much more adept way of predicting our requirements and modelling them before we need to do them. And that's with a view to sort of really cutting those 18 months down to as quickly as we can in terms of how we can change the timetables. So that's a really specific, but I'm trying to bring the digital element and data element together in terms of what we can do as an opportunity going forward. So hopefully that will encourage us to do more of that, but not just as a network rail organisation, but as an industry. So we're incorporating a lot of our train operators' data as well in terms of onboard activity as well. So it really allows us to build a complete picture of what's going on out there. And just to finally point on the sustainability, I would say this, wouldn't I? But we're one of the transport means which we only contribute 1.4% to the transport market in terms of carbon emissions. So we really want to be part of that, building back in a sustainable way. And let's not forget, it's not just passengers. We travel. We use 41% of the freight in the UK travels through my route, and they would run more, and we could run more freight through the main artery of the country. So that's a real opportunity for us to take on some of that. And a market which for us is a massively expanding one is the e-commerce freight. Putting some of that major parcel delivery mechanism that's going through the country at the moment through the backbone of the railway is a real opportunity going forward. So there are bright spots on the horizon rather than the 38% of passengers that are travelling at the moment.
Brilliant. That's a lovely positive note to end on. Now I'm going to attempt to get us through question 3, which was meant to be the orphan question, but I reckon we can fit it in, provided that each of the panelists just gives a 1-minute super fast answer to it, because I think it's really interesting. The one the organisers have come up with, they're asking, what have you seen in adjacent industries or in other countries that has worked successfully that you believe could be explored for your own effective operations? So quick fire, 1 minute each. Let's go back around again. So Paul, would you like to start, please?
I would, but I'm struggling to think of better examples than the ones I've already given. That's the problem, Jenny. What are other countries doing? It's very difficult sometimes to see into what's really going on in the country, right? One gets the headlines, and they're often in terms of, oh well, in Germany they seem to be able to do this, or in France they seem to be able to do that, and we can't. My experience, having lived in a number of countries, is that the same story is told in reverse from other places. So we need to be cautious about having too rosy tinted a view of what's going on elsewhere. But I do think that there are some public conversations going on in other countries which feel more balanced than some of the public conversations that are going on here. I think it's very easy to get swayed by arguments associated with the status quo, with the costs, the perceived costs, or the fear of losing things that we've currently got when the opportunities in the future are not well articulated. So I guess the lesson I would learn is let's have bold public conversations where we, the transport professionals, start public conversations from the position of confidence that we can see better ways to do things, and that the costs are more than balanced by the benefits. I think we very often have defensive approaches. I noticed in the chat there's a question about HS2. Perfect example, I think, of how not to have a public conversation about a piece of infrastructure. And we've probably not got time to go into that particular rat hole.
Talking of time.
But there is a bold strategic move. You can like it or you can not like it, but it's a bold strategic move which is continually discussed in micro technical ways, and we're constantly not seeing the wood for the trees, I think, in terms of the way we have this conversation and the way we allow this conversation. And honestly, we're lost if we can't have some big conversations about some big things, because the challenges we're facing are big, and we're not gonna nickel and dime our way to heaven.
Thank you very much, and I would agree. As someone who comes from a non-British cultural background, I find the way emotion is in all these discussions. It's about whether you like HS2 or not. Sometimes it feels to me, and I don't find that constructive. But that's just my it's a cultural quirk of mine. Okay, Simon, what do you think London might learn from elsewhere, or even maybe elsewhere might learn from London?
I think it just picking up. It does sort of run off the back of what Paul said. I'd written down before, it's all about how you manage people and the story around people. And right from the top, from government policy, if we look at what they did for the restaurant hospitality community, where the message was eat out to help out, whereas the message for public transport is very clearly don't use it. And even when they took that message off, they have never countered it. So in people's head, COVID equals don't use public transport, and we've not done anything about that. So the messaging to people, learning from other industries and other policies on that. I looked at the UITP figures and seeing the recovery from other nations from the initial lockdown. They were back to sort of 80% use because of proactive messaging right the way across the entire transport sector. And what we have now is we have both train operator companies, passenger authorities, passenger transport authorities, and everybody else having to run their own independent research and proving that public transport can be clean for use, but it doesn't come with any official messaging or backing from the back of it. So people have still got eat out to help out for restaurants, positive message, and you've got don't use public transport, which has never been wiped away. So I think the public engagement message is absolutely spot on. At a micro level, on a personal basis, what I've been looking at is the way that different companies and organizations have just kept in touch with their people. The right level of engagement, as we're all stuck at home working for 7, 9, 10 hours on Zoom and things like that. You lose the ability to collaborate. You lose the basic nature of where humans interact. And I've been really interested on how other companies have addressed this. I've seen all sorts of local contact groups, all sorts of things coming together. I think my main learning is that there isn't one single answer. As much as people are different and like being excited and motivated by different things, so is the right way of doing collaboration. So I haven't got a silver bullet that I can come here and say, do look at how so-and-so is organizing it. But I would think for any of us that are on the call, keep an ear out as to what others are doing to try and keep your team together, your company together. And in our case, in the market that we serve, the people that we serve, how are they reacting? What are the positives that they're taking forward? What changes their behavior? And can your business use that? So that's what I've noticed.
Thank you, Simon. Now, in the interest of timekeeping, I'm going to let off Jackie and James from learning from elsewhere, so you may or may not be relieved by that. But instead, I'm going to hit you with some questions which have been popping up. So thank you, audience, for your questions. And I'll start with Jackie. There's a question here from Lauren Shackman about taking an opportunity to catch up on maintenance while the network isn't as heavily used. There will never be a better time to get the network up to scratch, says Lawrence. So, Jackie, is that something Highways England is engaging with?
Yes, we've absolutely taken that opportunity. We've done it on a number of schemes. So we had schemes where we were night working, and because the traffic was so low, we could move them to day working and complete those earlier. We had, and that was a number of major projects. We looked at our maintenance arm and looked at what they could do, and so we completed a significant number of maintenance improvements during the period where the traffic was really low. So yes, we have taken those opportunities where we could find them and where it was safe to do so. So totally agree. It has afforded us an opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jackie. And James, the same question to you, because the Lawrence was interested in both road and rail.
Yes, indeed. And as described, we've done exactly the same. In fact, we took one of the biggest opportunities as part of the lockdown traffic cut to block one of our main arteries on the west coast, right the way through Kilsby Tunnel, which some of you may know is on the main line, which doesn't go through Northampton. So that's the main line between sort of Milton Keynes and Rugby, a main artery of the West Coast Main Line, which we very rarely get to shut down. We shut it for a whole 10 days, and we took a third of the tunnel track out, relayed all of the drainage, and re-put the track back, which we would never have got the chance to do in such a efficient and effective way before. So we've really mobilised that. Probably within about 9 days, I think we mobilised that £10 million piece of work. And interestingly, that's one of the things that's come out as an opportunity is we've proven to ourselves that we can move as an industry to do those sorts of things if we really put our mind to it. And that's on one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, absolutely. Daytime access as per Highways England, making access available to our staff on days when we can do maintenance in a much more effective and efficient way. So we've been pushing that hard and continue to do that. In fact, we've been requested to pull packages together now again to think about what we can do in the immediate future. So trying to take any advantage we can of the circumstances.
Great, thank you. Another question here from Theo Quick from Atos. Theo starts by thanking the panelists, which I'm sure we all agree with. He's interested in some comments on freight, logistics and last mile freight and the impact on our transport networks. Now, we all know that retail and manufacturing and just about anything needing freight has also had some big changes the last few months. So I suppose, Jackie, as in Highways England, your network is a massive artery for freight. Are you seeing any changes? What are your predictions?
So yeah, during COVID, one of the things that was, one of the users that were on our network were freight, and it was significant because clearly everybody was in their homes and wanting deliveries. So it was freight that took most of our network during the time when it was low. So even when it was 37%, it was mainly freight that was on our network. We've seen that grow, and we think it will continue to grow as online continues to grow in terms of people continuing to get their shopping online, continue to want Amazon deliveries, etc. Freight is increasing at the moment in terms of frequency of use. So yes, we see that as something that will continue to grow on our network.
Great, thank you, Jackie. A question on GDPR here, which Paul Campion has partly answered in the chat. I think I'll go to Simon, who also has data in his job description. Simon, is GDPR going to prevent us from doing all these great things we want to do?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, as it says in the chat, I think we're now really, really familiar with the legislation, and no, I don't think it's going to be a problem. But I think the public transport authorities will have to be. We will be cleaner than clean on this one, and I think the concerns that are quite rightly there have been about some of the interactions of some of the large companies. I'm not going to name them out, but all those that have got apps on your phone, what they're doing with the data that they're covertly collecting about you, I think is a much is a completely different challenge. But for most of the stuff that we're doing, you take the data, you immediately anonymize it, because I don't need to know that, as Jenny was describing in East London, that she's making a journey. What I need to know is that there's a significant movement of people from here to there over a period of time. And it's those data-based insights that you can derive from having the right core data. So my advice is, if you haven't already done this, put the effort in up front to make sure what your data needs are, clear that through whatever the governance in your organization is to make sure it's GDPR compliant, and you can do some fantastic stuff without crossing any of the boundaries on GDPR use.
Thank you, Simon. I'll finish with a question from my colleague Paul Hutton, which is how do we ensure that there is spending on transport when money will be tight? And I think you'd have to be massively more optimistic than even we are able to be to not see that public spending over the next decade or so is not going to be a free-for-all, and transport will have to advocate for our fair share. None of us have got comms in our job title apart from Paul, so I will. Paul Campion, apart from Paul Hutton, I should have said. Paul Campion of TRL, how should we advocate to make sure that we don't end up with a Cinderella portion?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to, as I say, have confidence in telling the transport story, but telling it as an enabler of fulfilled lives, which is really what it's about. We need to start by painting big visions and have confidence in that. But to go from sort of, the really big to the micro, there's another interesting discussion in the chat around this. I'm a strong believer that we need to think again about the way that Green Book, web tag are used, the way that we think about investment, and the way that we structure the money that flows around the system. So very interesting to have Network Rail and Highways England both on the call. They both own, for the public, critical pieces of infrastructure, but they're charged in very, very different ways. And we as travellers, as users, end up with very different price signals from those two modes, at least partly because of the way they are funded and the way the costs end up being presented to us. Now, these are all political choices, but political choices can be changed. And again, I think we've got no alternative, actually, but to engage in some of these discussions and to show the public at large, the politicians, what the consequences are of some of these decisions about the way that we spend money and the way that we think about the costs of the various options that we have in front of us. Because we might have to, my bet would be, we're actually going to have to rebalance some of these investments, and it's going to be much easier to do that if you like, is comparability and transparency, and people can see and feel the difference, the different trade-offs they're making. So, sorry, huge subject, but I think an unavoidable one for us. And I haven't even gone into, by the way, where does fuel duty tax come from in the future?
So, thank you, Paul. I couldn't have wished for a better statement to end this segment on. I'm sorry to the audience members whose questions didn't get answered, but the Jacobs Atos team behind the scenes here are brilliant people. I'm sure they will find a way of getting answers and engaging with the questions after the event. I now must thank the panelists for working with me, and I've learned a lot, and I hope the audience has too, and hand over to Chris Lewis, who is Vice President for Retail, Transport and Logistics at Atos UK. And Chris is going to wrap us up in the nicest possible way. Chris,
thank you, Jenny. Wrap you up, yes, that'd be quite. So, firstly, I just wanted to extend my thanks to everybody on the panel, to ITS, to Jacobs, to James, Paul, Simon, and Jackie. I think it's been a very, very lively debate. It's been an excellent discussion. I'm not too sure I'll do justice in a couple of minutes to everything that we went through, but I'll do my very best. I've reverted to spider diagrams to try and capture the conversation. So I'll be looking down at my notes as I speak. I think I'll probably group them into 4 key themes that have come through from the conversation so far. Speed of response and speed of change, I think, is a key one. So I'm a northerner by birth, as you can probably tell from my accent. I live in London, and the time that we've been on this call, I understand London has moved to Tier 2. Right, so that's I think it's a brilliant, yes, exactly, yeah. It's a brilliant representation of the speed of change, and also how quickly the transport network has had to respond to that change, not just the transport network. That's the first one, is about speed of change. Second one is about behaviours, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Third one was around services, and the fourth one was around economy or money, particularly around where we do our investment. So I'll try and keep it brief, but the speed of response and speed of change. What's come out quite clearly for me is the pace of change, but also how agile we've had to be to respond to that. And it's agile across a number of different areas. And that's taken into account, I think, as James's point about there are some things which you can't control. So how long it takes to change a train timetable, for example, there are some things which you just cannot physically change. But there are other things which we can respond to in an agile manner. And we've talked a lot about maintenance. We've talked a lot about reconfiguration of our services. We've talked about responding in real time to things like the drop in usage that we spoke about. So I think there was data about 30 to 60% at national level. I think inside London it was even greater. And on the roads, we've seen both a drop, a return to usage, but a different mix in terms of that usage. So many more people using the road network in their cars than we have done in the past. So that speed of response and speed of change has come through quite clearly. And it's been more around an opportunity. So how do we take this opportunity around change to look again at how we provide services to our clients and our users? Second thing was around behaviours. I'm just aware of time, but key thing for me across a number of themes was it's been interesting, I think, looking from the outside in terms of COVID and how people's behaviour can be influenced. So we talked about environment, we talked about sustainability, we talked about travel time, we talked about where people work and where they live. We talked about our staff quite a bit. But for me, interestingly, you can influence people. Now, how you influence people and what you influence them to do is quite important. But as we move forward into post-COVID world, we can hopefully use the learnings from this time period to influence people to either use rail more, use roads in a more effective way, think about how they impact on the environment. Third point is aware of time is around services. key for me was around the use of data, and I would say this, but people talked about innovation and adaptation, and the word digital and digital twin came up quite a few times. And I personally think from the conversation, there's areas where we can invest, which is the final point around how we use our resources and our fixed amount of money, which may go up or may go down over there in the short term, to create things like digital twins, which enable us to run scenarios around, where we invest our money, where we invest our time, what that influence can be, so what the impact can be on people's behaviours and how they use our services. And I mean, I'd like to conclude on that point. We talked about data, and we talked about digital, and we talked about investment and behaviours. I think there's a massive opportunities come through from the discussion so far as to how we think about planning and delivering our services in the future. So yes, thank you. Hopefully that's summarised. I'm sure I've done nothing justice to everything that was discussed. That was a very quick canter through it, but yeah, just thank you very much for everyone for taking part, and I'll hand back to Kate, I think now. I think I'll hand back. Will I hand back? I can do my Andy Burnham impersonation with my accent if that helps. No? Okay.
No thanks.
Maybe you and I are meant to close the event.
Are we? Okay, listen.
Sorry. Yeah, maybe you and I are actually meant to close the event.
Shall I pass back to you then, Jenny, to close? Is that, or should I do it?
Go on, you close it. They've heard enough from me.
I will close, and it's just to say thank you again, very much to all the panelists who've taken part, to James, to Paul, to Simon, and to Jackie. Thank you to ITS and Jacobs for helping to put on the webinar. I do hope everyone's found this useful. I personally found it extremely useful. I think there will be a recording of the conversation, which will be made available after the event. But at that point, thank you very much.
Thank you.